This is Runehammer. There are layers within layers. That which is hidden itself hides even more secrets. Even the darkest shadows thin in dawn's glow, but some nights can be so long, so grim, only the best of us hold on to hope. In these few, we place our fate. Let me tell you of the darkest days of Alfheim, when the innocent burned. A Burning in New Haven by Brandish Gilhelm. Chapter 1. It began as so many tales do. A drunk was napping in a goat mask. He slumped over, brigandine all clumped up around his waist and drained mug in one hand. His careless lethargy was a bitter comment on the scene and only made worse the imminent doom of the young girl imprisoned nearby. There were 6 cells in the lonely little dungeon, all empty save hers. Through a high loophole, rays of sun peeked, and the guards stirred. In many cultures across Earth, it is believed that the goat is an evil beast. Somehow, folk find a way to blame the harmless animal for the devil's influence, or use its image as a symbol of diabolical cults or grimoires. But here, in the burg of New Haven, centuries of dark history made of the goat a sort of talisman, or shield against the mind-altering power of dark magic. An oddity, even for Nordheim, but gravely serious in that part of the world. So it was, and would seem troubling to any visitors, the prison guards and witch hunters of New Haven wore those grisly helms in various styles. They sported short, curled top spikes, ragged beards, and ear-like side flanges of rolled steel. Of their higher ranks little changed, save a tall pointed highway hat and steel-toed thigh boots. For the historian reader, of course Ardenmoor, at the time of this story called Inglemoor, was most notorious for its dark secrets and blooded soil. Comparing New Haven to that eon-cursed honeycomb of death would be unfair, but hold your judgment. The evil in New Haven ran deep and old as the fallen serpent tyrannies of Coab. It would, in fact, be easy to lose our way in the tangle of events that laid the foundations of this little hamlet, but all in time. For now our story turns to that lonely, cold-barred cell in the morning chill. "Wake up, you sod!" came a bark from the entry. Clunky iron keys fumbled, and in the glare of the portal a tall man appeared. He withdrew a ring of keys, grumbling. The guard, goat-helmed and all akimbo, shook sleep away and did his best to stand quickly. "Morning bells and all's well, Captain," a muffled voice came from within the headgear. The accent was thick, curling his R's. A Ket mercenary, no doubt. "You'll be flogged for your wretched love of drink," the taller man seethed. "Now fetch me a wagon and escort detail. 6 men at least." All the while, this man locked his eyes on the little girl. She returned the hateful glare, unafraid, unmoving. Her blue eyes burned with unblinking rage, made grim by her youth and blonde fop. "One more thing, wretch," the captain shot. "Sir?" "My whips." These the guard diligently retrieved from the jailer's shed. The door was shut, concealing whatever horrors the captain had in store for the prisoner. Off then shuffled the clumsy underling, waving to the wagon detail across New Haven Square. These were 4 similar thugs, all but one goat-helmed and like a herd of killers. One lacked a tunic, clad only in kilt, a set of belt hooks, and a sword harness across both shoulders. They shared a few grunting words, and 3 more men were summoned from the alleys. A single mule, Palomino Mained pulled the wagon toward the jail. New Haven is not known as a crowded place, but on this fall morning there was a solemn and empty tone. Those who did come and go stayed to the edges of the public space. This may seem odd until you consider the whole scene, for there, at the center of the square, was a great square-milled post of dark timber, 30 feet high, and rooted in a stone stoop in a triangle shape. This shelf of rock was piled 10 feet high with bundled sticks, and on a leaning rack hung coils of anchor rope, neat and tidy. The post was charred, nicked with blade cuts, and 20 years old if a day. What a gloomy totem to remind folk of what was to come, and gloat on them with inevitable terror. "Wagon at the fore here, my lord," the napping gar said, unable to open the jail door. "Stay your drunken feet and men all," the captain's voice came through the door. "A prisoner must be prepared." Another crack of studded leather was heard then, but no scream. No whimper. The men outside knew better than to listen and kept their eyes on the dirt. And so it went for the long of the day, through the meals and the doings of the town. It wasn't the first such day here, and wouldn't be the last. In mid-afternoon's warm, more souls began to gather. Guards took posts in the round, and a sort of a rope cordon was set up to pen the crowd should it swell. A fleeting rain rolled in thin sheets across the hills beyond town, casting weird sliding shadows on the high roof beams and blue tiles of the town square. Pardon an old bard for shuddering with chill here, even so soon in the tale. For even to think of the fate of so many at that brutish pike, the flames climbing skyward, the screaming, and the blackened bones gathered. Alfheim at large had long moved on from these barbaric ways, but New Haven was an independent city-state, far from Grey or Ramthus, and no noble king or lord held sway to modernize them. Just to imagine that scene, deadly peace hovering like the reaper above the leaning rooftops and dark curtained towers. God's the dread of it. Enough of my silly sentiments, for here is where things began, as they often end, with fire. Chapter 2. New Haven was not the only village with old iron bars and grim shadows. 20-some miles south, in the crossroads burg of Arleston, far thicker bars in a far deeper pit held an impossible prisoner. Slumped in one corner was it, a colossal thing, elbows on knees, wrapped up in cold iron chains as thick as a man's thigh. The links of these chains were not rounded, but chisel-sharp, hexagonal, crusted and crushed with dry blood. The creature occupied the entire cell, bumping its stubby head even when sitting. Darkness obscured it. "What a lovely thing you are," came a stinging, sarcastic voice. "What a lovely killer you've become." A low grumble then replied, "Yes, you hear me, don't you, my wonderful giant?" This voice belonged to a slender, pale-skinned figure. He floated forward. No torch or candle had he, only the faint glimmer of red death in his eyes to illuminate his pale face. His hair was slick, black as pitch and waist length. Through this pierced spines and pulled steel points from scattered bits of decorative armor. In one long-fingered hand he twirled a playing card, the 10 of staves. "How did they even fit you in here?" he continued, trying to rouse some response. "Set's eye, why, you're enormous." He swooned and swayed at the bars, each as thick as a man's arm. "Have you heard our little plan, savage? Are you ready to return to the pits?" At this, finally, some reaction. The prisoner turned his head, hidden in shadow, and let one angry rumble through huge nostrils. At first, the pale man flinched, but noticed himself and leaned his feminine head back and laughed. The beast then roared, jerking forward against the great chains, but only once. "Don't disappoint me now, giant," the man said through his hair. "You remember my sting?" His eyes strayed to the playing card. Now here is a sudden moment in things. When first I heard the story, I can't say I saw it coming. Who knows how many horrible schemes awaited that chained titan? Who knows how long it had gone on, or what doom had brought this awkward arrangement? Little matter, for at that instant something in the behemoth snapped, and he was done with captivity. Not 1 second more would he endure the hissing nuisance of elves or demonic masters. With thighs like tree trunks he stood. In shattered ceiling and massive chains snapping like eggshells he stood. His rage was not even unleashed, though. Gods, he could have broken his bonds at any moment. Wrists still swaddled in steel, he lowered that grim, shadow-hidden head and simply pushed his way through the bars. The bars bent away like melting candles. One stride, another, snapping the ring from the lodestone that was meant to hold him. Down, leaning forward, another stride. As he came forth, as it came forth, the pale figure finally saw his dire servant in full. "Get you back!" the pale elf squeaked. It's almost pitiful to hear fear in the voices of those who feign dark power. In the bluish gloom, his fear was deserved. It was no easy thing to lay eyes on the captive. The creature was at least 11 feet from toe to top, wide as 5 men in armor. Its shoulders were massive, few stacked heaps of muscle that heaved with one slow inhale after the next. His form was human enough, but with a greenish hide, crisscrossed in scars and tendons. His neck was like a mountain, capped by a thick-browed head of nightmare. No nose had left he, but a flat pair of nostrils like a gorilla, and at 6 points, some kind of rusted bolts or threaded nails had been grafted into his blocky skull. The eyes were tiny black points. They were rhino-like in their eye sockets. His hands were bigger than a wild boar and wrapped in chains. It was like looking up at a siege machine of Ramthus. "Mercy! Mercy, beast!" None was given. With almost no effort, the Titan spread his bound hands, stretching and splitting the heavy chains with that squealing groan of rent metal. In this space, he aligned the tiny black-maned head of his elven captor, who was paralyzed with terror, and dropped his pitiful playing card. "Enough talk," came the gigantic voice. And then he simply closed his wrists. In a twisting vise of broken steel and crushing muscle, that elf demon met a crimson end. The creature saw his work. He saw the dead elf there, slump down, a body like a sack of onions. And he returned to his dark corner. More guards would come soon enough, yelling and prodding with their spears. And they would die too. This decision he could not undo. Freedom would mean death for so many. And this saddened him. It saddened it. And so he sat. He hummed in the dark. It was a song older than anything he remembered, beyond the beginning. He hummed it when death closed in, when the Reaper hovered above him laughing, when his giant hands were coated in blood. And again in the dim he hummed. This occurred below the fighting pits in that highway village, where the dark-eyed scoundrels bet their coin on murder and blood for sport. This was Udin's day, though, and the place was empty. Only a few spearmen walked the awning-shaded paves and the colonnades, the circular arena, and the sand-floored slave pens. Even they did not stray down into the deeper cells. A rumble and clang came from below, sparking the sentinels' attention. They gathered at the pit gates, which were hanging open. No doubt Gulka had been gloating on the beast again, his favorite pet. But something was wrong. They could hear the humming, and then gigantic footfalls down in the dim. "Call the shield men! Call the warden!" 3 pikemen braced their back feet at the pit gate, raised their 10-foot pikes at an angle, burying the hafts in the dirt as if a cavalry were about to charge. The spear tips were shaking. The other man ran off, dropping his spear on the spot, banging his chestplate with a short sword like a brass bell. "Alert!" Then another footfall. Another, closer. The sound of crumbling and dragging of steel. Each of the guards, looking down this set of stairs, they had all seen the beast, also called Chain by some of the crowds in combat. They knew they had no chance. And then those dark eyes appeared down in the darkness. 6 stairs down were they, and the creature could barely fit through the corridor. The low sunlight, shadowed too by the storms brewing over New Haven that morning, then revealed Chain, the beast, in full. From below the final tunnel beam he stooped and stood. He was 10 feet tall at least, 11, perhaps 12. His massive limbs were bare, save a brass-ringed kilt, and that was fitted with more steel loops where his bonds were once fixed. More chains there, and metal ruin did he drag behind. His blocky, impossible muscle dominated the scene. A few hairs swayed from his anvil-like skull, and he snarled at the pikemen, who looked like wooden toys before him.
"Aside!"
Chain muttered with little patience, but enough to spare 3 lives. The sun felt good, what there was of it, and he meant to walk free this day, for good or ill. "Back in your hole, monster!" This spearman was not brave, but foolish in his tone. For ire first drew he, and the other 2 barely held their ground.
"Aside!"
Chain held his fists, each as big as a beer cask, at his sides. The chain-wrapped wrists still dripped with red elven blood. "Back!" The guard, fool, waved his pike forward a half-step. This was beyond Chain's patience, and though he felt a sort of apology in his brow, his fists moved on their own. The spear he took in one giant hand, snapped it, and as the man staggered he waved him aside. With one backhanded sweep, smashing ribs and sending teeth flying, the guard went off tumbling. He smashed into a gray stone pillar like a snake dropped by an eagle. Limp. The pillar shook, but not as much as the remaining pikemen. Up 2 more steps came Chain, the beast, champion of the Arlston pits, and the high-helmed guards dropped their weapons and bolted. One puff gave Chain, and atop the stairs he came. Gods, he was huge. His shadow swallowed the tunnel entrance whole, and he shook away most of his bonds, keeping 20 feet of blocky links as his only weapon. Now what? Likely the pitmen would be coming. They would swarm and bark like wasps around him, and the pale elves would chitter and complain as they struggled to subdue him, dying in dozens. He rubbed the darkness from his eyes, and up north saw those rain clouds sliding. The sheets of mist looked gray and cool, and he knew then his road. Oh, what little we small folk know of true freedom, to look only to weather and will to set our feet, and so Chain began walking, hoping only to feel that cool mist and sit in the green grass a while, what he wouldn't give for one of old Ham's storybooks. When the warden and his troop, 30 strong, arrived at the pits, Chain had gone. To hidden alleys and tree-shrouded creeks he tarried, and they were too scared to find him. The airy, shrill voices of pale elves could be heard. They would not simply let him vanish, but their force was far too thin for a full hunt. So on over the glades tween Arlston Crossroads and New Haven, Chain wandered. A day's walk only from the blue roofs of that northern burg was he, and it was morning, and he was free.